So I want to talk about the Tennessee run game. Not that it's been bad under Josh Heupel, quite the contrary. We've discussed how everybody thinks this is an air raid, throw it all over the place, which Tennessee does throw it around. Tennessee also runs the football, but Tennessee hasn't had a 1,000-yard rusher in a bit. Anybody want to guess the last 1,000-yard rusher? It's not that hard, but
Jalen Hurd,
Jalen Hurd, what year?
2015.
Jalen Hurd, 2015. 1,288 yards. The last Tennessee running back that has surpassed the 1,000-yard total. Tennessee's come close a couple of times. Josh Dobbs actually ran over for 1,000, but if you count in the sacks and all that, he was down. Of course, he's a quarterback. Jabari Small came close in 2021. If he was healthy, maybe he gets it. Jalen Wright and Jabari Small both have been over 500 yards in their first two seasons here. Will Tennessee get a 1,000-yard rusher this year? And does the two-man system Heupel uses kind of alleviates one of those guys from getting to that mark?
I think it's the most overblown stat out there, 1,000-yard rusher. I think you got to look at what your total rushing yards are, what your average per carry, those types of things. Because I think in this day and age, if I'm a running back and these guys are more polished than they've ever been, I'm not looking to go somewhere and get 30 carries a game. I don't want to be wore out when I come out of high school or when I come out of college. I'm fine with a platoon system and a couple of guys. So I don't know that they'll have one unless somebody just gets really hot or you have some injuries. I mean, you look at this running back room right now, they're deeper than they've been. So it probably makes less sense for them to have a 1,000-yard rusher this year than it would have been the last couple of years. But I look at what Josh Heupel's doing in the run game, and they're running it really, really well, whether it's with two people or three people or whatever the case may be. So I think that stat has gone a little bit by the wayside in the college game because I don't think it's as big of a benchmark as it used to be because people just don't want to wear guys out.
I think you're seeing that it's a trickle-up effect as well in the NFL. I mean, there are just a couple of guys who are dudes at the running back position who is, RB1 in the National Football League. The rest kind of go by committee or kind of have a two-headed monster or whatever the case may be. And I think you're seeing that in both levels of football. Tennessee hadn't had a 1,000-yard rusher since 2015. Josh Heupel had a 1,000-yard rusher in 2018 at UCF, and then he had two different ones at Missouri while being the offensive coordinator of the Tigers back in 2017 and 2016. I agree with you, though, Brent. I think it's one of the more overblown stats, but still, for Tennessee to be successful, if you have a 1,000-yard rusher, Austin, I think that shows growth. I think that shows balance in this offense. And Tennessee does have the guys who are capable of doing it, but Wright's going to play, Small's going to play, Sampson's going to play, and neither one of those three might play enough to get it or should get it.
I see those pictures of Jalen Hurd, and I'm like, that kid in 2.5 years. Now, granted, he had 1 trillion carries in 2.5 years. He almost set the single season or the career rushing mark at Tennessee. And it just had this weird exit. And then when played receiver at Baylor. But no, I mean, you're right. I mean, I don't think Tennessee will have a 1,000-yard rusher this year, not unless somebody has one of those massive games and then just a bunch of solid ones. Like, what I mean? Like you get one of those like 225-yard performance, all of a sudden it's like, okay, that puts me, in a really good spot. The problem with, the Heupel's offense scores so fast in those blowout games against lesser competition, unless you have a big run, it's hard to pile up a lot of stats to me if you're the main guy. So like let's say Jalen Wright's the starter. Unless he has a big run, 50 or 60 yarder against, the kind of the three gimmies, to me it's hard to see, him getting more than 60 or 70 yards for the game just because I think Tennessee the game will get out of hand and they'll just start platooning and you'll get Dylan Sampson some run, you'll get Cam Seldon some run and so on and so forth. So, I think if Jalen Wright runs between 800 and 1,000 this year, I think that's a good solid year because, again, I think what Hub said is correct. And you're going to have it balanced out that I just don't think you're going to see that. Now, the caveat of that is everybody stays healthy. Now, let's say one of them goes down. Let's say Jabari Small goes down. He's been injury prone with the shoulders and such. Let's say he goes down. I think that's when it changes. I think that the number of carries for, Jalen Wright or something like that would go dramatically up. And so I think that's how you get to 1,000. But as long as everybody's healthy, I just don't see it.
Not a whole lot of 4-minute offense in this offensive scheme, Rob, for Josh Heupel.
Yeah, and I agree with everything those guys said. I mean, it looks to me like 3 guys are going to play. I mean, the way they finished last year, I mean, Dylan Sampson was as productive and dangerous as anybody. And I think we all were pretty high on Cam Selden coming out of spring. I mean, I just think the number of capable bodies is my biggest, reason to point to why they wouldn't have a 1,000-yard rusher.
Yeah, here's the other thing too. I mean, if somebody's getting 1,000 yards, okay, and they're getting the lion's share of the carries, okay, they're getting the bulk of the carries, then everybody's going to be asking, well, why aren't they playing? Where's Dylan Sampson or where's whoever the odd guy out is? And remember this too. This is Jerry Mack's challenge. Okay, because we talked about this, and well, Eric, you won't remember this, but Rob and I will, and AP will because he's got Morristown native in it. But in the day and age of the transfer portal, if that had existed 30 years ago, there's no way Little Man Stewart, Aaron Hayden, Charlie Garner, Mose Phillips were all splitting carries among 4 of them. Somebody's leaving, right? I mean, you had those 2 backs and Little Man and Aaron Hayden, what they did as a freshman. And then, by the way, we're going to bring in the best JUCO back in the country on you. You can go to the house, you can go sit out a year, or you can just lump it and like it. And they all stayed, which is an anomaly. And in this day and age, it's impossible to do. I think the biggest challenge is to keep multiple guys happy. And to do that, you better split the carries up. And that means you probably don't get a 1,000-yard rusher. Maybe I'm wrong in that, but that's the way I view it. Is you want to make sure all those guys are happy and getting enough run to justify, staying here and being a part of everything, because there's so much talk of everybody leaving every year. Roster management's so hard.
Well, I think that running back room. I think if Jalen Wright has a good solid year, I think he's gone. I think don't want to put the wear and tear on him. If he has, let's say, 900 to 1,000 yards, I think he's gone. What happens with Jabari Small? Like, technically, he can come back a year from now. But if his role has diminished some, does he try to go play his eligibility out somewhere else? Let's say those 2 play the most. Where's Dylan Sampson at heading into next year? Is he willing to stick around? And I mean, like, you hit the nail on the head, Brent. Like, I mean, like, you have to balance and juggle these things. And, I think what you're likely to see is 1 or 2 of your favorite players on Tennessee's football team probably will go to the portal after this year. 1 or 2 of your favorite baseball players may go to the portal after this year. Same thing with basketball. I think that's just that way across the board. I think the football team not really having any serious defections to this point speaks to Hype's culture and the fact that the kids enjoy their time at Tennessee. But at some point, look at Bear Alexander at Georgia. He won 2 national titles. He had a phenomenal national championship game. What did he want, though? I mean, I've got 2 rings. Let's go get paid. And so he went to USC, and he got paid. So,
where would you guys rank the Tennessee running back group amongst the other groups in the Southeastern Conference? I mean, it's got to be towards the top. It might not be the top. I mean, Georgia loses some, but brings back a lot. Alabama has got a couple of guys. You've got Ole Miss, who has 2 pretty decent options. Arkansas comes to mind, but we continue to say, we continue to reiterate, this is the deepest Tennessee's running back room has been since Heupel's been here. You got 3 guys that can play right now. You got a freshman in Cam Selden that you would just want to see play. Deshaun Bishop even added depth this spring with a really nice spring. Where would you rank this group, Rob, amongst other SEC groups to your knowledge? And I don't expect you to be an expert on Arkansas's running back room, but just kind of overall.
I think it's going to, and again, I'm not remotely an expert on Arkansas's running back room or, any of those guys right now. But, I think Tennessee's, I would put it in the upper half of the SEC. I mean, I don't know that I wouldn't say you have one of the, top 5 or, maybe even 8 backs in the league. But I think you've got 4 quality guys that we've seen, really do some things. And, production wise, from what Jalen did last year, I think, he probably would be in the argument for me for one of the top 10 guys in the league. I like this group probably better than most, but also if you look around, the league, there's not a Derrick Henry type. I mean, who's probably the best guy coming back? The Jenkins kid at Ole Miss.
Or the Sanders guy at Arkansas.
Raheem Sanders at Arkansas. I mean, there's not a Derrick Henry or Leonard Fournette type talent in this league. So I wouldn't have a problem saying, Tennessee, because of the depth, has, one of the top 3 or 4 running back rooms in the league, but they don't have that bell cow right now, or at least, not someone who has established himself as that bell cow.
Yeah, I don't think there's a star in the room, but I think top to bottom, it's a really deep room. And though there might not be a 1,000-yard rusher, Austin, I think it's going to be solid that a lot of guys get over 500 yards, add to this offense, and kind of roll the way it has in 21 and 2022.
It's good fodder for the summertime to talk about these running back rooms and kind of where they all are. I mentioned him last week. Jesse had his list. Tennessee was not in it. I think when you look at the totality of the room, Rob's right. That puts them in the conversation, right? Like there's not one guy that goes, yep, that's the guy. Tennessee's definitely, and it's the totality of the room. And the other thing I think you have to keep in mind is we can revisit this come next January and Tennessee may or may not be in the upper half, depending on that offensive line, Brent. Like, they still need guys to block, and what's that left guard spot look like? What's the right tackle spot look like? How's John Campbell played? Has Cooper stayed healthy? Has Sprague stayed healthy? All those are factors to me that will determine whether this group is near the top or not.
Well, and the other factor that you got to throw in there too is what were our defenses in terms of respecting the quarterback run versus a year ago with Hendon Hooker's ability to run the football.
Yep.
Do they run Joe the same way, Rob? Do they tweak it? Do they run it less? Do they put more burden on the tailback and a little less on Hendon Hooker? I think those are some interesting dynamics to go with the offensive line that make some of the run game stuff really interesting for this team and good, as Austin said, fodder for this offseason.
Yeah, I'll be really surprised if they use Joe anywhere near what they used him to that. I know you have to take out what was a design carry, what was a quarterback scramble, but Hendon had 104 carries last year, and that's with missing 2 full games. I'll be really surprised if Joe gets if he sniffs triple digits.
There was only one game, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but there was only one game where I thought Hendon was like, and I think the play calling as well kind of backs up this argument. I think there's only one game where Hendon was like, all right, I'm going to do whatever I possibly can to win this game, whether it be throw it, whether it be run it, whether it be whatever, scramble, and that was Florida. I thought he ran the football really well against Florida. A couple of those were scrambles for sure, but a couple of those were designed. But more or less, a lot of his rushes were just escapability, extending plays, and trying to make something happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think they tried to be careful with him and not beat him up. They were much better about that this past year than they were the previous year, when I thought they ran him a lot in games.
At Missouri? Up 40 points? What?
With games in control. But, I think they were careful not to try to get him too beat up because he was so beat up with everything he had going on the previous year. But when it was critical time, I mean, they were running him, right? I mean, the play he got hurt on was a design run because they were trying to win the football game at South Carolina. So maybe the plan going in wasn't necessarily to run him a lot, but as the game dictated itself, if you needed him, then they ramped it up. I mean, he ran it a decent amount against Alabama too. And so in the big games, when you had to have that play, they weren't afraid to go there. They just weren't going to get him beat up, in games where they were in control, which was a smart move on their part.
Yeah.
What did they do this year?
They do that this year too, Hubbard, just because, they're not real deep at the quarterback spot. Be very selective.
Yeah, I think they will do that some. I think the question is how effective is Joe as a runner compared to Hendon as a runner? I think that remains to be seen. Now, we saw the Clemson game. They ran the single wing look with him, kind of those sweeps on the end, and there was some effectiveness there. But I don't know, does Joe have the wiggle to run the quarterback draw as effectively as Hendon Hooker did? And if not, what's your counter to that? Is that more balls out in the flat to the running back to get them in space? Is that more jet sweeps with the Squirrel Whites of the world or a Cam Seldon? What do you do? I mean, I think that, Josh Heupel always talks about we can run this offense in a million different ways, right? Doesn't matter what the quarterback looks like, big, tall, big arm, not a big arm, run, not run, all those things. How does this offense evolve and look different this year than last year based on the quarterback's legs? Okay, we know the receivers are going to be there. We know they're going to throw it, but how do they tweak things with the legs? They play it the same way that they did with Hooker, or is there some different stuff in there with Joe Milton, which could affect a bit of the run game numbers as well? Maybe if you're running less quarterback draws, it's more carries to the tailback. I don't know. We'll see. I'm with Rob. I don't think you're going to see 100+ carries out of Joe Milton this year.
And I think that's something that will continue to evolve as the season goes on, one way or the other. Tennessee should be one of the better running teams in the Southeastern Conference this year. We'll see if it pans out that way.